Alright guys, welcome back. My name is Anthony and I'm showing you guys just a fun little full stack Flask application that I built. This app is going to interface with a data store, specifically a relational database, and is essentially a food tracking app that tracks what food you eat. So I'm going to go through this app super fast, break down some of the source code, and I'll try and keep it as short as possible. So let's go ahead and run the app here. So to run a Flask app, you're just going to type in Flask, make sure you have Flask installed, then your init file, which for me is app, and then I'm going to tell it to run that app by typing in run. Then I'm going to come here, just click command and click on it, and here is the application. So the front end for the most part was built in Bootstrap, and the back end was obviously in Flask, like I've said. So here's the login page, and you'll have these little flash messages for things. And let's go ahead and make an account. So I'll make a guest account. Let's make the guest email here, and then guest 123, and then guest 123. Then we'll go ahead and come here and call this 1234 Guest Street Ave, and then guest city, Florida, and floor 4444. So I sign up here, and then here is the area here, and you're able to essentially log in and log out here and add your food. So I'm going to add chicken, because guess what? I am eating some chicken right now. And I'm going to go ahead and say, I like chicken. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Anyways, yeah, fun. Alright, so I click add here, and as you see, it has a little description and then the chicken item here, and then I can also delete that food item as well by clicking the X. And I'll go ahead and create another item here, test ice cream, and I'll go ahead and click add here, and then if I log out, you'll see here it logs me out, and then here's the guest login here. I'll do guest 123. I'll come back in here, click log back in, up. Try this again, guest 3. There it goes. And as you can see, it logs me right back in, and I can delete and update my data store just like I did before. Cool. So that's the application. Let's go ahead. Oh, sorry, you guys don't see that. Let's go ahead and look at some of the source code here. I'm gonna go ahead and take this down. All right, so first things first, here is the file that runs the application. This is kind of like your server.js, your index.js and Node, but this imports Flask and Flask login, and this creates a function or a object, which we would call the app. Here is how you init the app, and then here is my secret config for the app. No, very secret. Registers URL redirects. This is going to grab your models.py, your authentication, and your views. And this is just some login manager stuff, which essentially registers, auth that login. And it's the database, and this adds the models from models.py to the relational database, so that when you try and write to the database, it knows what you're talking about. Loads login manager, and this just loads the user. So essentially, like, whenever you go to the home page, it's able to like grab the user information, and this then returns the app. I create the app, and then this essentially says if I'm not on this app.py file, or if I don't try and run the app from here, it will just return. And debug equals true means every time you restart or you make a change here, it resets the server, so you can see those changes. So that's this page here. Let's go ahead and look at our models using some object-oriented programming. I'm going to init my database here, and I chose to init it here because I didn't want any dependencies on my app.py. I primarily did this for production reasons, because I may have to change the name of this depending on how this is launched, whether I use, like, you may have to change the name of this. Let me just put it that way. So I initted the database here and just imported it from other places. Just getting some stuff from SQL Alchemy and Flask here, and then essentially just defining my stuff here, passing the database.models file, and then user mixin essentially allows me to like log in the user and add some user functionality here. And then here's just my ORM, or object relational mapper. I create a foreign key here, map out all my stuff, and then I create a relationship between the user and then the food object, and this is going to back populate, and that relationship for back population is here. So this back populates to this. This maps to data store and writes to data store. This maps to data store and writes to data store. Here is our food object as well, and then again the relationship is defined here. Cool. That's pretty much your models.py file. Your views file is kind of like your auth file, except it normally doesn't need authentication, hence why it's the views file. But they both essentially handle views. Here's just importing some necessary modules. This declares the name of this file as views. And then here, this is going to route just the basic request. So if there's no endpoint, it's just slash, then you're going to get a GET request. And essentially, if you get a GET request, it's just going to render this, and it's going to ask for the current user. And if there isn't one logged in, then it's going to route you to auth. And that's done by this. And then if you're on the home page and you do a post request, which is sent via clicking at the add food button, this is going to add to the database, and then this is the flashing. So if the food length was less than 1, then it would ask you to enter a food item. And if the food description was less than 1, it would be like, yo, please enter a food description. And if it worked out well, then it would flash the food added. Here is the committing to the database. The new food here grabs the food model, which was imported up here from models, and then adds it and then commits it right there. And it still renders back to templates. And then this is going to delete the food. This is also configured on the front end using some JS, which we'll see in a second. But essentially, if you go to this endpoint here and do a post request, it's going to run this, and it's going to grab the food object that is passed when this all happens. And if it finds a food object, it's going to map the food user ID to a current user. It's then going to delete the food and commit the change and let you know it committed. If that doesn't happen, then it's just going to return some JSON and say failed. And if they didn't find a food item, then it's going to return some JSON and say failed. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the views file. Let's head on over to the auth. So auth here, we're just going to do some importation. The only weird one maybe is going to be this security guy, which we'll talk about in a second. I have no idea how to say his name. I just know he came up with the idea of a hat. Well, he didn't come up with it. I don't think he came up with it. I actually have no idea who came up with the idea of a hashing function, but I just know that this is the module you import to grab hashing functions, which I'll talk about in a second. But essentially, again, this names this file as auth. So whenever I talk about auth, this says I'm talking about this file. Then here's my endpoint for login, which is going to take 2 requests, get and post. We're going to define this. So if you get a post, then the form is going to ask for your email and password, and then it's going to query. And if it finds you, then it's going to go ahead and check you using a password hash. So the hash here stands for a hashing function, which essentially says that it only goes one way, meaning you can't find an inverse. So the easiest way to think about this is if you have y is equal to x plus 1, and I'll just write this real quick, try and keep this brief, but this is kind of important for cybersecurity reasons. I can't indent. Why can't I indent? Whatever. Okay. All right, so here we are. So let's say y is equal to x plus 1. So in this case, y is mapping to x. Y can revert this, and let's say I'm giving a y or an x of 1, right? I can say, well, y is 2. Well, what if I'm given a y? Can I map to x? Yeah. If x is 1 and y is 2, then if I do y minus 1, I'll get x. So in that case, this function here had an inverse. I would say it has an inverse, and you could actually mathematically prove that it has an inverse. A hashing function is where this is not the case and you don't have an inverse. So that's what this does here, and then this guy, we'll call him the man. The man came up with this method here that essentially hashes your password so it doesn't have an inverse. So it's going to then check that hash which was generated in the signup. I'll talk about that in a second. And if your password hash works with what you sent, which was queried here or was grabbed here, then you're good. And it will flash that you logged in, it'll log you in and remember you and redirect you to your views.home, which I already went over. And if it fails, then it'll flash you and say try again, like you just saw. And if you don't have an email or it doesn't recognize the user, it's going to say it doesn't recognize you and return some login. Okay, here's a logout. The logout is literally just going to log you out and redirect you to login. Very straightforward here. Yep, nothing really to say about that. And then sign up, you have, again, you're getting your post. The get method's just going to render the HTML. And then if you do a post, it's going to get all the information from the form. And I tried to pick a more complex like ORM to kind of showcase my skill with ORM. But essentially, you name elements in these HTML templates, which I'll talk about in a second. And this allows you to get those elements here. And then from here, I check and make sure your email is less than 5 characters. You wrote a first name, your passwords match. Let's see here, you have an address that's more than 5 characters. You have a city that's more than 1 character. Same stuff here. And if any one of these fails, it's just gonna flash you a message saying, yo, this failed. And if none of this fails, then it's gonna commit you to the database, which it does right here. And it redirects you to views.home, right? Which we saw earlier. Here's the views.home and it asks for a login. So when it does that, remember is equals true, you're all good and it will log you in, and it'll also flash the message that the account was created. And if you fail any of these things, it'll just re-render the sign up template. And that's pretty much it for the back end. Nothing too crazy here. You pretty much have your views, or I would call these your controllers here. You have 2 controllers here, although technically they say views, but I think MCV life, where not MVT. Weird acronyms. But anyways, here are your like controllers here, and then here's your models, and then your views are going to be right over here. So I use this idea called template inheritance, which comes built into Flask and Django, as a matter of fact, which is very, very, very nice. It essentially allows you to make a base template and then have all your other templates inherit from it. Really, really dry. Love it. Awesome. Beautiful. And then as well as that, I also did some Bootstrap because, again, Bootstrap is very dry. I hate having to make the same navbar 5 times. I'd rather just grab some Bootstrap stuff. So anyways, I digress here. Here is the head metadata for our base HTML. And the only thing I'm going to change here is the title based upon what HTML page is being rendered. Some more metadata, and then just a link to Bootstrap here, and then a link to my style sheets. I'll talk about this in a second, but something important about Flask is you have to do this right here, which essentially is the only way to really grab a static file. You have to declare that it's in the static directory and then put where the file is here, your path variable here. And then this is just some Bootstrap stuff. So you have a Bootstrap class here for nav, and then you have some buttons and the href here, and then the anchor tag here. And this is just the first tag here. This actually doesn't redirect you. This is just the nav bar thing. And then here's going to be your redirects. So I created an unordered list and then have my list items in here. And then in each list item, I have an anchor tag with the text displayed, and then the endpoints declared here in the href. So this is login, logout, sign up, and nothing, just your regular start endpoint there. And then it ends that tag here. And then here's how I flash the messages, is all going to be here. So this essentially is a for loop. And this is one of the great things about Flask, is you can kind of write these Python-y expressions here. And it's not like exactly Python, but it's pretty close. So essentially this takes the flash like messages, it takes it, and essentially when I declared something as like either an error or as a success, if you kind of look back in the like auth dot or the view dot, I'll use auth, right? You either had category error or category success right there. Okay, so right here, this is going to loop through, and then based on whether it came through as great, right? So type is error, then it created a message like this. So it just created a div with the message, and then this kind of did the styling right here. And this is inbuilt in the Flask. And then if it was a success and the else here, it's going to send the message. It's going to create the div class of success right there. And since there's only 2 categories, if it wasn't an error, it's automatically a success. So that's why I did else instead of like elif. And then that ends the if, and then this does a for loop through the message. It did a for loop through here. So this grabbed the types, and then messages and messages was done here. So you had the if statement that controlled what the type of message was being sent, or the like type right there. Then you had a for loop which looped through the types. Then you had an if, which essentially says, did you even get any messages? And then this grabs all the messages being sent. So that's kind of how this all works. Again, this grabs the messages being sent. This checks to make sure that the message exists. This then loops through the types in those messages, and then this controls the like what message or what display is being done based on the type here. Cool. That ends the block, some Bootstrap stuff here, and then we end this right here. On to our home. So this right here is how you do some template inheritance. You do extends base.html, which essentially grabs all the stuff from HTML and like extends it to here. Okay, went ahead, made this home. Here's my content. This is the food eaten recently. Pretty straightforward. And essentially then you have this nice little for loop which kind of goes through all the food that you queried. This query here is sent to the backend right here. So when you go to the home page and you do a get, it's going to send the current user to you right here. And then with that, I am able to loop through the current user. So for food and user, because the user was sent, .foods, right? And foods was declared here again in the models.py. So here's your food relationship, which matches the user. So you have that. It's going to grab the food name and the description. Here's your H5 and your P tag. And here's your button to delete the thing. And it's going to call a JavaScript function, which I'll talk about in a second. But there's your on-click stuff. And then that adds that and ends that. And then right here is your form for doing a post request to add food. I'm not going to get super into this, but essentially this is just some Bootstrap. The only important thing here to keep in mind with forms is the name, because name here is what's going to pass from client to server. So whatever you type in this box here for the input text, whenever you click submit here and you do this post request here, the name keyword here is going to create the variable name for your backend. So for example, when this gets pushed, add food item, if my backend receives that request, you get a post request, notice it's going to do request.form.get, and then this is by that name, that key name here. This is like a variable, and that's how you're going to pass from client to server, is this name. And that's pretty standard stuff, nothing too crazy here. But yeah, and then of course this is a Bootstrap class. And then here's your login. It's going to do a post, and essentially it's just going to get your email. I put this here for anybody who just wants to jump in the app and not have to make their own account. I'll make a guest account when this goes to production, and it'll allow you all to log in and kind of mess around in the guest account, you know, have some fun. But yeah. And yep, that's pretty much it. And this right here was put, so it makes a button and signs you up. I'm not going to get too much into the forms again. Essentially, it's just a Bootstrap class done with some styling, and you have the different types here and all of that good stuff. And then again, name is the key, you know, thing here, the key word to declare, because this is the whatever you put here is the variable that's passed to the back end and allows you to grab the information that was submitted from this form. Log out just logs you out, and I actually didn't even change this from just my basic thing. You know, this actually doesn't even need this. If I didn't even want it, it wouldn't change anything. And then your sign up here, it's just a more extensive form. You essentially have this, and again, you just have a form. And I've already said so much about forms, but just one more time, this name here is really the big thing, and then this is all Bootstrap. So one thing you may notice is that normally when you use Bootstrap, you have to use the CSS that comes with Bootstrap. And some people don't like Bootstrap because of that, but there is a great workaround with Sass. Sass is a great thing that essentially allows you to alter all the CSS classes Bootstrap. So how does it work? essentially I have a node package manager here. I put this in my static file, so it's kind of separate from my Python stuff. Just keep things organized. And inside of here, you have this bootstrap thing. And essentially what you're able to do is in your SCSS, which is kind of like the SAS programming language, you're able to import all the bootstrap stuff here. And I just got this off of the bootstrap API documentation. And then you can put your own CSS here. And what happens is when you do a SAS watch, and essentially you would cd into that directory. So you do like cd static, and you do cd, or you do, what is it, SAS watch dash watch, and then you do scss :css. I'm pretty sure SAS is installed, but we'll check here. Yes. So that's essentially what this does. And then essentially any change I make here, so let's say I just wanted to change the background color from this color to something else, so like 100, and then, yeah, cool. Whenever I do that, you see it compiles here. So what it does is it imports all of these stuff here, which is all of the bootstrap SCSS, essentially grabs all of these things here, right here, and imports them into here. So go ahead and just control out of this. So essentially then when the CSS is recompiled here, it not only added my body tag up here, but it also added all the other like bootstrap stuff. And then the style CSS is the mapper. So this kind of maps everything. And that's a good way to overwrite bootstrap stuff for front-end development. And I kind of wanted to show that I have that knowledge. It's a very nifty thing because we all love working with bootstrap, but sometimes overwriting the CSS classes can be a really big pain. Okay, so then the next thing here is your index.js right here. And essentially what this did was it handled the on-click stuff. So essentially you have your, let's check here. Let's go to our templates, and inside of the home page you had this call. Now this was called in the base HTML, which was imported right here, and then right here is your on click. So this essentially sends the delete food method here and takes the food ID. And essentially the way this works is you would come then to, where was it? You back your static, your JS, and this does a promise. So this sends a fetch request to the endpoint. The endpoint was declared in my views, that's right, my views, which is right here. There's that endpoint, and then at the method's a post, right? So this does the post. And then essentially this stringifies the food ID so that Python on my backend can use it, and then just refreshes the page. And this is a promise. So a promise essentially passes two things normally, which is a resolution and then a catch. But since I'm just refreshing the page each time, I didn't add the catch method. So that was kind of what you have here. And I just console log click because I wanted to console log click for testing. You don't really need this. But yeah, I think I touched everything. And that's pretty much the app, you know, and then a couple other files here. This is just where the database is. This is some cache. And here's my getignore, you know, for source tracking. And the requirement.txt is all the requirements. And if you ever want to install the requirements, you would just do pip install -r requirements.txt, and it would install your dependencies. But oh, I'm in the static file. That's why it didn't work. You have the cd back out into this. Now it would work if I ran this. But yeah, so that's pretty much everything. I hope this was a really, really good walkthrough of the app. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for your time.